Engineering. This is the first seminar of 2020 that the CViCom is organizing, and we are very, very pleased to have with us Professor John McCall. So I'm going to introduce John McCall. I'm going to read a small biography so we know who is with us. John McCall is the professional lead in predictive data analytics at Robert Gordon University. He has researched in machine learning, search and optimization for 25 years, making novel contributions to a range of optimization algorithms and predictive machine learning methods. He has 130 peer-reviewed publications in books, international journals, and conferences. These have received over 1,800 citations with an H index of 21. John and his Smart Data Technologies research team at RGU specialize in industrially applied optimization and decision support, working with major international companies. Major application areas for this research are vehicle logistics, fleet planning, and transport systems modeling, predictive modeling, and maintenance in energy systems, decision support in industrial operation management. John and his team attract direct industrial funding as well as grants from UK and European research funding councils and technology centers. John is a founding director of two companies, Celerum, which provides consultancy and general optimization services, and Plan C Solutions, which focuses on marine planning and logistics. John is a member of the IEEE Evolutionary Computing Technical Committee and is an associate editor of the IEEE Computational Intelligence magazine and of the IEEE Systems, Man, and Cybernetics Journal. He also serves on a number of advisory bodies, including the Oil and Gas Technology Center Academic Panel, Opportunity Northeast Digital Advisory Board, and the Scotland IS SDS Digital Skills Partnership Advisory Board. So we thank you very much, John, for agreeing on lecturing this seminar. Thank you very much. And please welcome John McCall.
Thank you very much, Boris, for that kind introduction, and thank you for your welcome and for coming along to see me today. So the topic today is how to get by in much, much less real-world optimization. So let's think a bit about the real world to just put this talk in context. So we're all familiar with the big global challenges of our time, climate change, massive storms, fires in Australia, flooding, the ice caps melting, and driven by human activity, driven by our industries, our activities, and the changes we've made to the world, not just in terms of carbon pollution, but in terms of massive movements of people, animals, plants all around the world. So we really are driving huge change in complex ways that we hardly understand. And we have grown to interdepend on each other to a huge extent, and we have built vast and complex systems that we use. So mainly there I'm talking about transport systems, that's from Mexico City, but also in terms of the goods, the freight that we send around the world to connect to each other. So vessels are loaded up in China often, huge container vessels, and they send goods manufactured there all over the world. This happens to be in the Netherlands and Europe, which is one of the main kind of distributing centers for the world freight industry. And of course we fly everywhere. Everyone flies everywhere. That is also in the Netherlands, which is a major European hub for transport. But we're all aware at the moment of the coronavirus and its spread via international travel and airlines and so on, and how difficult it is to control these things. This is just a picture of some of the systems we have. This is in Osaka, and in Japanese cities. They are huge, and they have very sophisticated mass transportation systems that take people, millions and millions of people every day, round their cities. So we have built ourselves a very complex, connected environment. Things happen in nonlinear ways, and it's driving us to a point where our ecology and our systems are becoming unsustainable by the resources of the planet. So we have a need to be able to understand and control these systems. We can't wish them away. We benefit enormously from them in many ways, but they are out of our control. So I'm a computing scientist, and many people here in the room will be computer scientists or engineers or have a strong interest in computer science. So one of the things that we have also developed in recent years is some technologies which offer means for us to understand and control the complexity that we've now created, and in fact have grown out of it and also contribute to it. So I'm going to talk about the general area of data analytics, and if you Google data analytics and look for images, as I often do when I'm constructing presentations, you'll get lots of diagrams like this that show data flowing through connected processes. So these might be programs, but they also might be information coming from physical sensors, connected through various wireless or wired systems. So the first thing we're doing with these complex systems when we do data analytics on them is we're abstracting the reality of the system into data flows and processes that happen to those data flows. And the concept of data pipeline is now well established and is actually driving the development of various programming languages and data handling technologies. And you can sort of, I've gone the wrong way, you can abstract certain themes into a data pipeline. So at the start there are data streams coming from all sorts of sources. Those sources can be noisy and unreliable, so there is a process of validation and cleaning. And there's a whole area, Internet of Things, around the various devices that we use, not just to record what's happening in the environment, but increasingly to affect what's happening in the environment, so information can go back down these streams. So Internet of Things is all about connecting everything up and being able to essentially instrument our environment so we can know more about it. But of course, at that stage, it's only raw or locally processed and cleaned data that we get. We then take our data streams and we put them through a whole bunch of operations. So I've labeled this kind of the part of the stream data science, and we do things like filtering, aggregation, clustering, basic machine learning, and lots of systems have this embedded in it now and come from free. So large corporations, governments, even on your desktop, you can get all of these things. You download the R environment or Python or whatever thing. There are packages, there are modules in those environments that give you all of this for free. So you can build your own data pipelines very easy now. It's easy to assemble those. And data scientists, data science are becoming part of the woodwork in every organization, and doing absolutely essential work. And underlying all this, of course, is cloud computing. So we have abstracted away from the physical boxes, the drives, and so on, and we have built ourselves systems where we don't have to worry. Well, if you're a cybersecurity person, you do worry, but you don't have to worry in terms of your use of the data about where the processing is taking place. Processing is done on large architectures where you can pull processing blades in and out without stopping the processing, and so on. Memory is highly flexible, storage is highly flexible, and so on. So cloud computing has given us the ability to virtualize computing power, to deploy it where it's needed, to make it accessible where it's needed, and to do very substantial computation. So you can very quickly assemble large computational power when you need it, and then not have it when you don't need it. So again, that has created enormous flexibility in our data processing systems. So all of this has become, well, it's very new to a lot of people, and it's very new to society, and it's making lots of new things possible. But if you're in computing science, you're in that area, a lot of this has been around for some time, and you can think of statistics with the batteries put in, supercharged by computation. But at the high end of it, because there are so much data being produced now, and because the systems that we're describing are so complex, then there are some things that still remain quite difficult. In fact, I would argue increasingly difficult, and that is the topic I was mentioning earlier, controlling and understanding these systems. And there's a set of areas that a lot of research, and certainly the research of my group, I've broadly labelled it artificial intelligence, but some of it is about also human-in-the-loop interaction, presentation to humans, brain-computer interfaces, all that kind of understanding of how we get embedded in the system, because we are ultimately driving those systems by our needs and our selection of particular technologies and our designs of systems. But also automation is having huge impact, realizing efficiencies, making things possible that weren't possible before because they're faster, because they're cheaper, and so on. And then within that, also the process of optimization. And I would say those last two, and a little bit of the first one, are the areas that I'm normally operating in when I do kind of industrially focused research. And what I'm going to argue today is that these areas, and I'm going to kind of show you how it works, these areas are the areas that give us some hope that we can understand these complex systems, and also that we can do things much better, that we can actually operate in the world with sophisticated technologies, with sophisticated societies, but not having anything like the same effect we're having on the environment. And I'm not pretending I have the whole answer, but what I'm saying is that there's some good news here, and that we have a substantial part of the answer. So I'm in an area, my specialism area is in an area called nature-inspired computing, and I think it's quite a nice thing that we can, when we think about these complex problems that we have to solve that are doing so much damage to nature, that in fact nature itself gives us a lot of inspiration as how to do it. So nature is a very good problem solver. So whatever ecological niche there is, nature has managed to exploit it. So you have massive creatures like blue whales, tiny creatures like pinmoles living on loaves of bread and so on. In the deep sea vents where they discovered volcanic smokestacks on the bottom of the sea, there are organisms living in there. Whole ecosystems have grown up. So life, nature, is very good at finding and exploiting a niche and working out how to survive there, how to grow. Termites operate, they build huge termite mounds, and those mounds are such that they're very well ventilated, so the air flows through them in a way that keeps the whole termites cool. They would cook. This would just be an oven if you didn't have these airflows. Now, the individual termites don't know about the air vents that go through, but they have evolved in such a way that by reacting to their local stimuli and the way they are designed, they'll chew a bit of wood, they'll stick it on, and that is what will emerge. So the swarm, the collective of the termites, is capable of doing much more than each individual one. And this is going to be a theme of what I'm talking about today: is how intelligence can be distributed, and problem solving can be distributed up into lots of little tiny bits and pieces, each of which are quite easy and simple to do, and if appropriately designed, can combine together to do quite powerful problem solving. This is another example here of a slime mold, which is an aggregation of lots of little microscopic creatures, and this was work done by some Japanese scientists where they injected slime mold into a maze that they had made, and they distributed food around this maze. And the slime molds would just spread out and fill the maze, but when they only put a sugar source at the two exits and entrance of the maze, the slime mold distributed itself optimally so that most of it was near the sugar, and then they were connected by a minimal path that ran through the maze. So a slime mold, a collection of little single-cell organisms, can solve a maze, which is quite interesting. Everyone knows that ants are capable of combining together to solve complex problems. There they are, bridging a gap. Flocks of birds get together and manage to traverse thousands of miles, or they to combine together in massive swarms to head off predators. So my message here is that nature gives us patterns for understanding complex systems and how the actions of complex systems can be combined in constructive ways. So I'm now going to step into naturally inspired computing, and I'm going to take you on a bit of a deep dive to some cutting-edge research, and then I'm going to come back at the end of the talk and show how this helps us to find efficiencies and get by on much, much less. So the first concept I want you to get here is the idea of when you solve a problem, you can take quite a complex problem and you can think of a solution to that problem as a code. Okay, so I've got three examples here. First example is, it's a well-known computing science problem called the Knapsack Problem. And the idea is that you are going on a journey and you have a variety of items you can take, and each item will take up a certain weight in the backpack, but also it has a certain value. So the compass is quite a small thing, and it's very valuable because you need to be able to find your way. So it's a small weight, high value item. If you take a large rock with you when you go walking, then it's a large weight item, and it probably has a very small value when you take it with you. So these items in the knapsack have various values and weights, and the knapsack problem is that you have more to take than you can possibly fit in the backpack. So which items do you take? So you can encode a solution to that problem by having a 0 or a 1 representing whether you take or don't take that item in the knapsack. So I can take this kind of real-world situation here, what do I pack, and turn it into a decision, which is essentially just a string of zeros and ones, which is of length equal to the number of items in the knapsack. And so it's pack no 0 or yes 1. And I call this a coded solution. It might be a very stupid solution, or it might be a very good solution. We'll come to that later, but it's a solution nonetheless. It's something I might try to do to solve this problem, and that's how it's encoded. Here's another problem here. I'm trying to decide, this is something that happens off the coast of Aberdeen, where we have a lot of wind in the North Sea. We're trying to decide where to put windmills in the sea to maximize our power production. And so I have maybe a lot of information about weather patterns, maybe I have engineering information and so on. But my decision ultimately boils down to a set of coordinates where these windmills are going, these wind turbines are going to be. So I can encode a solution as a set of X and Y GPS coordinates for a wind farm. That's a solution. Again, it might be a very stupid solution, or it might be a very clever solution. I'm not thinking about that at the moment. I'm just thinking, how would I represent it? So I'm saying something that looks quite complex can actually be represented in a very simple way. And here's a third example, one close to your hearts, I know, which might be a timetable for a university, and there are a bunch of classes that have to take place, and there's all sorts of information about how long the classes will take place. And actually, I think these are exams for this particular answer. So these are exams that have to take place, and there are various rooms in which they take place. That's an exam timetable. But you can encode that in a number of ways, and one way of doing it is just to sort of say, I'll have a bunch of slots, which would be rooms at particular times that I can put exams in. So if I just give a number to these slots, then a timetable is just for each exam. So this is a string of length, the number of exams you have to timetable. For each exam, I'll just give it a number, and that's the slot I'm going to put it in. Yes, it could be a very stupid solution. You could have people with two exams at the same time, or you could have a very silly answer to that. But nonetheless, it would be one way of encoding solutions. So I've said you can have very good solutions and very silly solutions, and the sorts of algorithms I'm going to be talking to are going to be then searching for these solutions. So the missing component, before I get on to those search algorithms, there's one more component, which is, okay, a solution's good or a solution's bad. How do I actually evaluate that? So to set up one of these search algorithms, you need two things: an encoding and a way of evaluating it. So for the knapsack problem, that might be quite easy. You've got a weight for each item, and you've got a value for each item. So you take your string of zeros and ones, you add up the values of those. So if it's a 0, you don't add the value. If it's a 1, you do add the value. And that's the value you get unless the sum of your weights is greater than the maximum weight you can take in your knapsack. And if you over exceed the capacity of a knapsack, you get 0 for your solution. That's one way of scoring. So I can take this as a decision, and I can score it. So now I can compare different solutions. I can change my ones and zeros about, and generally try a bunch of different things and evaluate them and compare them. How would you do that for the wind farm? Okay, we've got a set of X and Y coordinates, but how would we possibly evaluate that? Well, the evaluation may require quite a bit of computation. So we may have, some sort of computational simulation. So we take that set of coordinates, and we've got a whole computer simulation which we might require the cloud to run on. It might feed off data that comes in through sensors and so on about wind speed and temperatures and so on, wave height, different parts of the sea. But that simulation would then say, well, given those locations of your turbines, this is the energy output we would expect you to have. And perhaps it would give some other criteria that you could use to help inform your decision. So you go from your simple encoding to some other process that's going to give you a value for that encoding. And that could be quite a complex process. And then finally, for the timetabling, you would have, you put your exams in these slots, and then you go through and you look for the bad things that could happen. So you say, oh, there's 2 exams that the same people have to do there. That's a constraint violated. There's somebody has 3 exams on the same day, even though they're in different places and different times. That's a bad constraint. That's a violation of a constraint. So you can give it a score, just counting up the number of bad things about the timetable, and then that allows you to compare 2 timetables. So again, there might be a whole rule set behind this that you have to work your way through to count the number of constraints. But we've got computers, so we can do that, right? Okay, so we can take solutions, we can encode them as simple strings, and we can provide a value to them. So the next thing to do is to sort of say, well, how do we use this to solve our problems? So I'm going to be talking for most of the talk today about what are called population-based meta-heuristics. And they're just algorithms that do the following. They say, right, I understand how to encode solutions, so I can have numbers at these different points or letters at these different points. So there's a whole bag of possible solutions now. I've enumerated them. I know what they are. But I can't, usually it's too expensive to evaluate all the solutions. If you evaluate all of them, just take the best one, but usually that's too expensive. So what a population-based meta-heuristic does is it reaches into the bag, takes a bunch of solutions together, evaluates them all, thinks about that in some way, which I'll go on to describe, and then selects a new bunch of solutions and evaluates them, and then selects a new bunch of solutions and evaluates them. That's basically it. So what you're doing is you're reaching into this bag, and really what you're trying to do is to learn the relationship between the encoding and the value so that you can efficiently move to high-value solutions. That's essentially what a population-based meta-heuristic done. And they're all like this. So you initialize your population, you reach into the bag, you evaluate them, you learn something, you update the population, and then you keep going, you reach into some more based on what you already know. That's it. That's what they all do. So I'm going to briefly talk about 3 different flavors of these and show how they're kind of, this lends itself very well to being naturally inspired. So here are 3 different population-based meta-heuristics, and I've drawn them in a way that shows you that they really all are quite similar in concept. So the black boxes are all the same, and they're the same as the black boxes on the previous slide. It's just about reaching into the bag and then generating more solutions and going round a loop and eventually returning a final population, hopefully containing the best solutions you've ever found. In the middle, you've got this purple area, and this is the naturally inspired bit. So when I say we think a bit and we learn something about the solutions, the way we do that has a variety of ways of doing it, and a lot of them are based on natural systems. So some of you, who here has heard of a genetic algorithm or has used a genetic algorithm? Yeah, 1 or 2 people are familiar with this idea. So in a genetic algorithm, you say the string, the encoding of the solution is like the DNA of the solution. So I'll use the metaphor of survival of the fittest. So I'll take a population of these and I'll evaluate them all, and the most fit ones will survive. So I'll select them, and then what I'll do is I'll breed them together. So I'll do various splicing and recombination operations on those encodings to make new encodings. And they will also be solutions. I don't know what their value is going to be, but I'll make children. So I'll take those parents, I'll make children, and then I'll mutate the children to mimic the way genetics works. And that's a thing. So for those of you who haven't done it, that's a thing, and it actually works quite well. And so you go round and round in this. At each stage, the selection and the breeding is driving the encodings that you're generating to look more and more like high-value solutions. So you're basically searching a space driven by these genetic ideas. Here's a second idea of particle swarm or swarm intelligence. And in this one, you imagine that the encodings are the locations of agents, particles that are flying through the search space, and they communicate with each other. So they evaluate where they are, they communicate with other particles about where they are, and then they adjust their velocity, and they gradually swarm and converge in high-value areas of the space. So anyone here done a particle swarm? Nope. Fewer. Well, 1 person down the front there. So again, these are quite simple operations. They're operations based on individual members of a population. They do simple things. They remember where they've been. They talk to other particles, and they decide where they're going to go next. But they're very powerful and capable of solving some quite complex relationships between the encodings and the evaluations. Or you can decide, so estimation of distribution algorithms are something that emerged a bit later than these nature-inspired. So you can decide, I'm going to be a bit more mathematical about this. So what I'm going to do is actually learn the statistical relationship, or at least estimate it, between the encoding and the value. So everything else I'm going to say in this is focusing on estimation of distribution algorithms, which is an area I'm particularly expert in. So I'm going to show you how a simple estimation of distribution algorithm works. So think of that loop that we saw before. You've got to generate an initial population, and then you'll evaluate that population, and then you'll do some thinking, which will be the EDA thing, and then you'll iterate that. So what an EDA does, its idea of thinking is it has a model of what good solutions look like. Okay, so each solution that we generate here, we're going to search a space of binary strings. So imagine we're solving the knapsack problem or some other problem that's been encoded as a string of zeros and ones. So we start off, we don't know anything about the problem, so we say in each position of the string, there's a 0.5 chance it'll be a 1, and therefore a 0.5 chance it'll be a 0. So we can use a random number generator or something, and that probability to generate solutions, generate strings of zeros and ones. So let's generate a population of them. So we generate a population that's quite evenly distributed in each thing between zeros and ones. That's what we get. And we then evaluate these solutions. And now we need a thing that's going to say, what we want to do is know not just what all solutions look like, but what do good solutions look like. So we can truncate that and say, well, let's just take the best n out of m of the solutions. Let's say best 50%, something like that. And what we see there is that the distribution of ones and zeros isn't 50-50 anymore, that good solutions prefer ones or prefer zeros in different positions of this string. And we can actually take that sample and say, well, in this sample of good solutions, actually the probabilities look a bit more like that. And so we've learned something, and we can think, right, well, let's try and, I'm not going to just believe this because I've only sampled a small number of my solutions, and there's a gazillion solutions in this space, but I'll bias my view of what a good solution looks like by this. So there's an idea. So PBIL stands for population-based incremental learning. Okay, so it's population-based. We've learned something, and we're going to increment our knowledge by using that learning. So what we do is we say, for each of these things, we'll set new probabilities in each column, and it'll be a proportion of the old probability plus a proportion of the new probability. So we'll always get a number between 0 and 1. So we'll go part of the way between that 0.5 and that 0.25. And there's a parameter alpha called the learning rate, which just says how much you're prepared to move from the population you've already got, how accepting you're prepared to be. So we do that, and when we apply that model, we get a new probability vector. So this is us having reached into the bag and got our solutions and thought about it. We now want to generate some new solutions and evaluate them. So we now use this new thing. We generate some new solutions, and now these have got those biases, and we can evaluate them. So we evaluate them, and we get a new set of sample values, and then we get a new update equation, and so we go on round and round the loop until eventually what actually happens with this algorithm is generally speaking, these values converge to where you're generally always generating a 1 or generally always generating a 0 or very close to it. So actually the variation in your sample here starts to converge, hopefully on very good quality solutions. You don't get any guarantees of optimality in these examples, but in practice on very hard problems, they tend to work quite well. So you can get much more sophisticated about this. I've only shown what's called a fully factorized probabilistic model. So you might be saying to yourself, well, actually, maybe some of these values relate to each other. Maybe if I take one thing in my knapsack, it might affect the value of another thing I have in my knapsack. And maybe there are problems where these variables relate to each other. There's a whole research area about that, and there's a whole way of building more sophisticated Bayesian network models, Markov random fields, and so on. I don't have time to talk about that today, but it's a thing, and you can generate very powerful algorithms in this way. But I've concentrated on quite a simple encoding, and it does for a lot of problems, but I'm going to move on to talk about a set of combinatorial problems that fit with a lot of the decision-making systems that we have, a lot of the problems that come up in the real world, based on networks, and they're a little bit more difficult to encode, so I'm going to give you some examples there. So some of you might have heard of the graph coloring problem. So when I say graph as a mathematician, I mean network. So a graph is something with some nodes in it, connected by edges. And the abstract graph coloring problem is, how many colors do you need to color in the nodes so that if two nodes are connected by a color, by an edge, they don't have the same color? Okay? If you've understood that, how many colors would I need to color that graph? Four? Well, 4 would certainly do it, so I could certainly do it with 4. Any advance in 4? Well, actually, you can get away with 3. So there's a coloring. No two connected nodes have the same color, and I've only used 3 colors. And I can actually tell that I must have 3 colors because nodes B, C, and E are all mutually connected. So none of them can have the same color. So there's what's called a clique of 3 nodes. And if you've got a clique of k nodes, then you must have at least k colors to color the graph. So if I gave you a bit of paper and some colored pens and 5 minutes, I'm sure you could quickly satisfy yourself about how to color that graph. And here's an application. I was talking about scheduling earlier on. We're thinking of exam scheduling. So we're trying to, let's suppose we've got a bunch of exams we're trying to schedule. So let's say everybody does the English exam. Then you don't want that to take place with any other exam. So you can do a connection between that and all the other subjects. So the English exam is connected to all the others. And the colors are going to represent available exam slots. So a particular color is an exam slot. Whatever color I give to English, I can't give to any of the other exams. And then there might be things like maths, physics, and biology. They're all sciences. Maybe people do a number of different sciences, and those exams can't happen together. So we might add some other edges for those. And then we've got some humanities subjects down here, so we might add some edges for those. So we basically know what classes people are doing, so we can fill in these edges so that nobody gets an exam at the same time. So if I can find a way of allocating slots to those exams such that no connected nodes have the same slot, I've solved my problem, or at least I've come up with an exam timetable that doesn't have any clashes. So it's a graph coloring problem. And here we see what I've done is I've just taken a simple-minded, there's 4 slots, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and I've colored all these things in, and I've painted myself into a corner because I haven't colored in English yet, and it's connected to everything else, and I've used all my 4 colors up, so I'm stuck. So what I've got here is an incomplete, an infeasible solution. So whatever color I give this now, whatever day I put English on, it's going to cause somebody a problem. However, I can rectify this. I can put English in a Tuesday, so I can give English yellow, and then I can give geography any color other than red. So as long as I don't schedule geography on a Monday or a Tuesday, I can put it on a Wednesday or Thursday, and I'll get a feasible coloring for that graph. So you can see how you can use this to as a way of finding a schedule. You don't really need to know anything about the subjects or the people involved or anything like that. All you need to know is about the nodes and edges, and if you find a correct coloring, that can be translated back into a schedule. So the kinds of algorithms that we're looking at take a complex real-world situation, turn it into a combinatorial problem, and then you've got algorithms that are good at solving combinatorial problems to actually solve these, and then the solution gets translated back into what you would actually do in real life. So far, so nice. It's all very clean and easy. How about coloring this graph? Just quickly, how many colours do I need for this graph? Not very easy to do, so seek a no-clash union solution with minimal resource. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, it's I've got to colour in the nodes. Maybe I could just give myself a number of colours, a reasonable number of colours, and just try and colour the graph. And maybe, actually, the best thing to do, I've got computers, I've got a lot of computing power, I'll just do all the colorings. I'll just try them all, and I'll pick the best one. I can score them. I can do that, so I'll pick the best one. So let's say you've got 7 colors. So let's say it's exams. You've got 100 exams. Well, university could have 100 exams easily. And there's 7 days in the week. You could do all your exams in 7 days. Well, let's have Monday and Tuesday of the following week. We don't want exams on the weekends. So you use 7 colors, 100 nodes. And how many solutions does that give you to try? Well, each node can have 7 colors, and there's 100 of them. So if I work out all the combinations I have to try, it's 7 times 7 to 7, 7 to the power 100. Okay, so that's beginning to sound a little big, but let's work it out. Is this 320,000? Oh, wait a minute, it's not. There's a few zeros in there. There's another 79 zeros in the middle there. Now, if we allocated, let's say, all the computers on the planet, 1 trillion computers, 10 to the 12 computers, something like that, and let's allow them to calculate 1 million a second, something like that. So that takes kind of... We do a bit of parallelization, so that would take 18 zeros off there, but we're still left with 65 zeros. And we're doing something that, you're calculating 1 million solutions a second on each of 1 trillion machines. It would still take you longer than the age of the universe to work your way through this simple problem. And yet universities do have 100 exams, and they do manage to schedule them in 7 days. So how exactly? Oh yes, sometimes there are clashes. But generally, they do manage to do it. So how do they do it? Well, what humans tend to do to solve this problem is just add some more colors. Okay? So if we have 100 colors, this is an easy problem, right? We just give every node a different color, and we've definitely solved the problem. Now, what would that mean in terms of the actual problem? Well, it would mean the exams would stretch over 100 days. But scheduling would be really easy. Okay? So what you find in these problems is there's this kind of tension between, if I add more resource, more slots, more available slots, or it could be more, kind of industrial equipment or whatever. If I add more resource, I can solve my problem, but at huge cost. And this is this picture is at the nub of what we're doing today, because when we're faced with complexity as humans, we will add more resource because we can often pass the cost on, or we just say, that's what it costs to do. But in fact, what we do is we add more than is actually needed, and very often quite a lot more than is actually needed. And the sorts of algorithms I'm talking about today are able to cut through that complexity. So let's carry on with that story. So when you're encoding problems like this, it perhaps can be encoded as a string of colors, but quickly that becomes a little impractical. And one thing that you often do, and this is a really powerful method, is to encode your solution now as a permutation of n objects, okay? So solutions are represented as an ordering of n distinct objects. Have people come across the symmetric group Sn? Put your hand up if you have. Well, I'm a mathematician, so I have. But maybe a lot of you haven't. You might come across it when you do a discrete maths course, or for example. But basically, it's the set of ways of ordering n objects, okay? And it becomes a group. There's some algebraic structure on it because you can do swaps that move you around the group. So here is what's called the permutahedron on 3 elements. So this actually represents... Oh, it's actually on 4 elements, sorry. This actually represents the ways of ordering 4 elements. And so up here you've got 4, 3, 2, 1. And down here you've got its reverse, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so these are different orderings. And you can move around the polyhedron by, you've got red, blue, and green. You can make a swap between 1 and 2, or a swap between 2 and 3, or a swap between 3 and 4. So if I make a swap between 2 and 3 here, I go along the green line and I get 1, 3, 2, 4. And then if I make a swap between, another swap, I go up there, and another swap, I go up there. So I can move around this space using swaps. So you can see how perhaps a naturally inspired algorithm could use these things as the encoding, different orderings of the things, and then play around with that, perhaps using the operations of the group, or perhaps using some other means to take sets of these and search them. Now, of course, you don't get this for nothing. Permutations are orderings of n distinct objects. Can anyone tell me how many ways you can order n distinct objects? Well, there's a name for it. It's called n factorial. And it's n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 times n minus 3 times n minus 4 down to 1. So for 4 objects, for 3 objects, n factorial is 6, 3 times 2. For 4 objects, it's 4 times 3 times 2, 24 ways. And actually the number grows exponentially as n increases. So for the problems that we're looking at, you've got 100 factorial, 500 factorial ways of ordering these objects, and we again get to age of the universe calculations. We can't evaluate everything, even if the evaluation is very fast. So we need to search these. But it turns out that actually a lot of very important abstract academic problems that relate to real-world situations are naturally encoded as permutations. So one is traveling salesman problem, which is about routing around different locations. So think of touring a set of n cities. Which order do you visit the cities in? That's the traveling salesman problem. Quadratic assignment is about flows, minimizing flows between facilities and locations. Now you can think of that in terms of the environmental efficiencies that might release when you've got international supply chains. And then another one is permutation flowshop scheduling, and this is about ordering jobs, tasks on machines. And actually, this is the one I'm going to focus on today. So we need ways of searching through this set. And I said I was going to talk about EDAs, and I'm ultimately going to come to an EDA that is a way of searching through this set. So one way of, so if you just encode a permutation as that, it's a string of objects. So there's a permutation of 5 objects. It's the first object, followed by the fourth object, followed by the second, followed by the third, followed by the fifth. So if you were doing a permutation flow shop, then this would be the objects would be jobs, and this would indicate the order in which jobs were started through a set of machines in a flow. Now, one way of indirectly encoding a permutation is to have a similar string called a random key. And what you do is you allocate a floating point number, let's say between 0 and 1, to each of the objects. So object 1 gets that, object 2 gets that, object 3 gets that, object 4 gets that, and object 5 gets that. And then what you do to get the permutation is you just sort the objects by the value of the number. Okay? So here, 1 getting that, 2 getting that, 3, you then sort them in increasing order. So 1's got the lowest number, so it comes first. 4 has the second lowest number. I'm not sure if I actually got that quite right. 5's got the highest number, so it comes last. 3 should really have come second, so it should have got the second lowest number. Anyway, I haven't done that right. But anyway, the ranking here is used to order the objects. Random keys allows you to, because this is just a string, and there already are lots of algorithms that search strings of real variables, then the attraction of a random key representation is you can use all these you can search strings like this and then convert them into permutations to get their value. But you can do all sorts of operations on these. The classic problem with doing random key algorithms is that, say for a genetic algorithm, if you splice something and mutate it, you end up with something that isn't a permutation. So there are awkwardnesses in generating your new set of permutations. There's a whole area of that, again, I don't really have time to go into. But all random keys can be easily translated completed, you don't waste any time in validation or repair mechanisms. One drawback of these is that the absolute value of the key doesn't have any meaning. So if I changed any of these values without changing the ranking, I would get another equivalent random key that would generate the same output. So you've got gazillions of different random keys giving you the actual same permutation, and that can actually cause real problems when you're trying to do these algorithms. So I've given you a bit of background to random keys. Nice, neat way of encoding a permutation, but what's called over-representation. Too many different random keys give you the same solution, which can cause search algorithms problems. What I'm going to present is an algorithm called RKEDA, and I'm going to just miss out this particular slide because it's probably just technical detail that you don't need. But basically what RKEDA does, it's just another EDA. It does selection, modeling, and sampling. But what it does is it uses a representation which is random key, so you get a population of those, and then you turn them into permutations and you evaluate them. So let's say it's a scheduling problem. You turn your random key into an order that you're scheduling. You evaluate your schedule by some computational means. You get a score back, and that's your score for this. So then, like with PBIL, you can then truncate to get your best solutions. But rather than allowing the variation of a random key, we do what's called rescaling, which means we take everything and we put it onto a fixed position on the range 0 to 1. So if there's n objects, they go in chunks of 1 over n. So that's the rescaled algorithms. And then what that does is it means that we eliminate all of this complexity of different representations, and then we can average essentially a number that's telling you the position, the rank that a particular object tends to come up with in good solutions. So that's one of the innovations we use for RKEDA. There's another innovation that we used as well, which is classically in RDAs, when you're using numerical representations, you represent it as a Gaussian, and you estimate the mean and the variation of the Gaussian from your population. So the innovation we've done is actually what we've done is said the variation is something that's going to give us a lot of exploration, a lot of different populations that we can generate early on, and then later in the algorithm we want to be much more precise and focused on areas of good value. So it's a bit like, if any of you are familiar with the idea of simulated annealing, it's a bit like a cooling scheme in simulated annealing. So basically what we do is we start with a fixed variance that's going to apply to all of these. So we work out for each object what its mean position is, and then early on, then when we're sampling, we allow that either a large variance at the start or a small variance at the end in order to search the space efficiently. So it's easier to see this with a picture. So here's our model. So imagine each of our objects in our permutation has its average position that we've learned at some point in the algorithm. So this dark green object tends to be second, this grey object tends to be first, this blue object tends to be last in good solutions. That's what we've found. So they have a mean position that's putting them there. And so imagine here we've learned that towards the start of a search. Now, because we've learned it towards the start of the search, we don't really know much about the space yet, so we'd like to evaluate a lot more. So we won't bind the objects like that. We'd like the objects to be able to move about and shuffle. So when we sample them to get new positions for those objects, new random keys, we allow them to move about quite a bit, and we have a variance that's quite high, so that when you sample those two variances, there's quite a good chance that the sampled values will swap over. So what we get with the high variance is when we sample it, we might generate a permutation that mixes up those objects quite a lot. So we can evaluate something from a completely different part of the space we haven't seen before. But later on, let's say we're now quite far on and we've got to this position, we don't really want to change things very much. This represents a lot of learning from a lot of samples. So we now have a small variance, and lots of things will stay where they are, and some things will swap, but maybe not by very much. They won't necessarily move by very much. So that's our algorithm. That's what it does. It uses random keys, means generated from the population, and a variance which is controlled centrally to cool throughout the search. And we use that to search through spaces of permutation space. We can apply this to any permutation space. And what you find out when you're in the area of natural inspired computing is that different algorithms run well on different problems. So I'm going to show you what happens in permutation flowshop scheduling problems. So I've mentioned it a bit already. You're running a set of jobs that all have to run on a set of machines, and the order you start them off in the machines determines a number of things. You can either look at the make span, which is the time the last job finishes on the last machine, so it's the time for the whole process, or you can say, actually, I'm more interested in how long particular jobs are staying on the machines because I want to balance, I want to minimize the time for any job to stay on the machine. So you've got a thing called total flow time, and that's actually a much harder problem than solving for make span. So we'll look at total flow time. And I said that lots of different algorithms do perform differently on different problems. So a lot of what my community does is horse racing of different algorithms and different problems. So we publish papers saying, my algorithm did better than your algorithm on such and such a problem. So there's a set of benchmark permutation problems, tired instances, and they range in different sizes from 20 jobs on 5 machines, and here I've got 200 jobs and 20 machines, and there are much larger permutation flowshop problems. And these are, as they get large, quite difficult to solve. And here are the horses running along here. We've got RKEDA, which is my algorithm. We've got best known, best ever found solutions for a lot of these algorithms, a lot of these problems. And then we've got in green here, we've got a bunch of leading edge estimation of distribution algorithms, and those use quite sophisticated models. GM is General Mallows. It uses a model based on a central permutation, which attaches a probability to each permutation. These, with H in them, are histogramming algorithms that make histograms of different patterns within the permutations. So these are quite heavy in terms of the calculation you have to do to calculate the probabilistic model and do the sampling. And then this one is the General Mallows model with a variable neighborhood search, local search added onto it. And then there's a bunch of algorithms that are not EDAs but are very, very good. So we started this work at a time when there were many good algorithms for permutation-based problems, but EDAs weren't quite good enough yet. So you'll see that these algorithms are quite competitive. But HMEDA is also doing very well compared to those algorithms, hybrid EDA. So that was really the state of the art at the time we were doing this. IGA is also a very good algorithm. DEP is another approach called differential evolution for permutations, which uses the group structure very heavily. So there's a whole bunch of research groups of which mine is one, racing on these problems and improving our algorithms and competing with each other to get better results. So here are the results of that was the results of one horse race. And what it showed was that on small problems, RKEDA isn't very good. I mean, it does okay, it solves the problems, but not as well as the other algorithms. If we looked with other EDAs, we noticed that as the instances get larger, RKEDA is the black line here, and what you want to be on this is these are the average percentage difference from the best performing in the group. So if you have a high bar there, you're not doing very well. So RKEDA doesn't do very well on these small problems. But as the problem size increases, RKEDA starts to do quite well, and by the end, it's outperforming the other EDAs. And we've gone and done our analysis up to the very largest flow shot problems. And at that point, a lot of the EDAs drop out. They don't solve the problem in reasonable time. The Mallows models and histogram ones and the hybrid one are still in the mix, right up to 500. But in fact, RKEDA starts to outperform them. And it also outperforms DEP and variable neighbor search. So only the iterated local search are doing better than RKEDA. But the kicker is that RKEDA we ran with only 20% of the fitness evaluations used by those other algorithms. So it's really fast, and it's coming up with... It's fast in two ways. It's fast in that it's using fewer fitness evaluations. So a fitness evaluation in these, remember, often involves actually computing a schedule, or it could involve an expensive computational simulation. So if you can do it in fewer fitness evaluations, even if you're not getting quite as good a result, it's very valuable. But also in a second way, the modeling required by RKEDA is much lighter weight than those other algorithms. So obviously I'm saying my horse does very well in this race. What you do in these research things is we all compare each other's algorithms on various measures of efficiency, and we're really just trying to explore what works and what doesn't work, and more importantly, why does it work or it doesn't work. I don't have time to go into the whys for it today. That's a very difficult area. So what I'm saying is that you can take these very complex combinatorial problems, and that these naturally inspired algorithms can do really, really well on them, and can be the state of the art. In fact, often they're the only way of solving these problems. And when you compare them to humans solving the problems by what did we do last year, or let's do something that works, or usually let's add a lot more resource, they can be massively, massively more efficient. So let's come back to the real world now, and I'm going to look at an application area Boris mentioned earlier that I've done a lot of work in marine scheduling. So in the North Sea off the coast of Aberdeen, there are a whole bunch of oil and gas installations, and they need supplied with equipment. And that equipment goes out using supply vessels. And there's about 150 supply vessels operating in the North Sea. They're organised into fleets owned by companies, and then some, not pirates, but freewheeling boats for hire that can be hired at busy times if your fleet can't do the job for you. So the problem is to get these bits of equipment out to these platforms using these boats. And essentially what you've got to do is to load these onto the boats, and then once you've loaded these onto the boats, that tells you where the boats have to go, because each of these has a destination. So this has to sail to all the installations for which it carries cargo with that installation as a destination. Okay? So an allocation of these to these then implies some sort of route for the vessels around a certain set of installations. So a particular solution will then result in a number of tours of vessels. So this isn't just a simple job shop scheduling problem. It's not a simple traveling sales problem. It's not a simple quadratic assignment problem. When you come into the real world, you have to take these concepts and adapt them to the particular situation. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in here. There's combinations of search algorithms and other sorts of statistical models and so on. But suffice it to say, RKEDA is involved here at this sort of stage. So the evaluation of this, so I can do an allocation of packages to vessels, and I can evaluate it. So we have developed over the years a simulation of vessel movements in the North Sea. So we can take the solution of our algorithm and we can turn it into a simulation of the vessels going to particular installations. So we have multiple fleets operating here. You can see they're of particular colours, they're visiting those colours, and then they sail back to the harbour. And, we know how long it takes to load and offload. We know what the capacity of the harbour is. We know what the weather is. There's a whole bunch of different aspects come into this simulation. So what we're doing here is we're using cloud computing or high-performance computing to evaluate many of these solutions and come up to good plans for how people should use their vessels. So we've been doing this for a while, and the largest study we've done is with this is the central. What you're seeing here is a sectorial map of the central North Sea. So the UK government allows oil companies to bid for areas of the North Sea to drill in. So over the years, they have all bid for different parts of the North Sea, and they're drilling in those areas, so they're producing oil and gas from there. And they need to be supplied from Aberdeen, which is down here somewhere. You'll see a better map in a minute. So we looked at quarters 20 to 22, which is the central North Sea, and there's a whole bunch of different operators, oil and gas companies, owning installations in these areas, or sharing, in some cases sharing. And some of the big ones, 6 of the big ones, agreed to participate in our study. So they gave us data about their vessels. They gave us data about their daily sailings over a year. And they gave us data about tonnages that were moved and all that sort of thing, and other data about constraints that they have. And we combined that with some, I was going to say freely available data. It's broadcast data. So every ship above a certain size on the planet has to broadcast what's called an automatic identification system signal. And those are radio broadcasts. They're also picked up by satellites. And you can buy that data. So you can buy data that says, here in the North Sea, over this year, are all the AIS messages that were broadcast by vessels. And then you can mine that information and you can reconstruct where the vessels actually went. So we were able to mine, this here is mined from AIS data. So these are the AIS data vessel traces for a year in the central North Sea for supply vessels only. And when I say supply vessels, some of them are actually also on safety duties as well, so they'll not actually have to screen them out. So if you take out the crosstalk here, what you see is a very distinctive pattern of the oil and gas companies will have to send something out to a platform. They'll pick a vessel, they'll load it on, it will sail out to the platform, and then it will sail back. So the way they organize it, this is human organization. They've organized it so say, okay, we need a vessel for that platform, one for that platform, one for that platform, and so on. So it's almost a vessel per platform. But what's happening is these are the platforms located in the North Sea. So something that's sailing out into the middle here is sailing past a whole bunch of other platforms that might actually have some equipment that they need at the same time. And these vessels are sailing with 30% deck capacity used. And some of the stuff that goes out comes back as well and isn't used. So it's very, very inefficient. So what we did was we used this information, and we used all the information we got from those companies, and we also used some information we got from onshore logistics about materials that were coming in on trucks into the harbour to build a picture of what this activity actually was, so we could understand and translate it into an optimization problem and then give that to optimization algorithms. And this is what the optimization algorithms came up with for that year. So if we take the optimization algorithms and we say, do all the same stuff and schedule these activities, this is what they came up with. And you can see that those algorithms are making use of co-locations of platforms. There's a lots of trips that are visiting multiple platforms. And in this middle one, we just allowed the algorithms to visit platforms only belonging to the same operator. Okay, so each operator's fleet had an independent optimization problem. In this one, we actually allowed operators to share vessels. So we sort of said, well, you can visit any platforms where there are co-located and multiple things to visit. There's some constraints on there. You can't sail for more than 3 days, and I won't go into all the details of it. Opening and closing times of platforms, a whole bunch of constraints on there. So what were the results of that? Well, what we've here are the results for the independent optimization. Here are the results where we allowed fleets to be pooled between operators. And what you see is over the year, there's a different demand for the vessels. So there are peak times in the summer, there are low times when there's bad weather in the winter, and so on. And a similar picture for the pooled, but perhaps a lower vessels number of needed. So this is the number of vessels needed. And what we did was we used an optimization algorithm to say, can you get by with less vessels? Can you take vessels out of the fleet and still meet all the jobs? So we started with a fleet that was used, and then we took other things out. So our algorithms found that it needed between 3 and 21 vessels weekly, and so if you take a level of about 15 vessels through the year, then on 5 weeks only you would need to actually buy in spot vessels. So normally these companies have to hire a vessel. If they hire it, they have to hire it for a whole year or perhaps longer. So you want to hire enough vessels to meet most of your needs, and then you'll just take it on the chin that you might have to hire an extra vessel for a few weeks of the year. So you could get by with about 15 vessels. In terms of what we found from the AIS, those companies were actually using, they were using 25 vessels. Okay? So we've saved them 10 vessels out of 25, so 40% saving in the number of vessels. Now, I don't know if any of you are in the oil and gas area or related to it at all. These vessels cost about $10,000 a day to hire. Okay, so you're talking hundreds of millions of pounds, nearly £500 million spent in the North Sea every year on these vessels. So 40% saving is a big deal. If you go further and you allow them to actually pool and share their vessels, which there are legal barriers to doing, but nonetheless, if it's worth it, why not? Then you can take another 4 vessels out. So you're only using 44% of the vessels you would otherwise have used. So this is just an illustration of how by using these intelligent algorithms compared to human scheduling, you can make huge savings. And these schedules are robust. They take into account delays, times things take. They have been scrutinized heavily by the industry because this is bad news for people who sell vessels, so they would like it not to be true. So anyway, the general results, potential reduction of 40 to 50% of the vessels, plus a 5 to 10% reduction. In terms of days sailed, obviously there are fewer vessels, but they're sailing for longer journeys. But it works out that you're sailing 20 to 25% fewer days, so there's therefore a saving in fuel costs as well. I've only talked about vessel hire costs. And of course, that's all environmental impact. Marine diesel is one of the most polluting, and of course marine engine emissions are heavily polluting, so that's a big saving. And so you're potentially looking at up to £100 million saved per year in the North Sea. So there's an environmental benefit and there's a financial benefit as well. You tend to need both. So in conclusion, we are in a target-rich environment in terms of complex, difficult problems that need to be solved quite urgently. So this is an exciting and interesting area to be in. We can't keep going the way we are. Our consumption of resources is unsustainable. But we are complex. We are driving the world in very complex ways. We rely on very complex industrial systems. But those are routinely over-resourced. Okay, so not a lot of these, increasingly you hear about Industry 4.0. A lot of parts of the logistics industry are taking these algorithms on board and are making savings already. There is much, much, much more to be done. Resource minimization is inherently complex, and therefore you need data analytics and AI to make these big reductions, big delta as I call it. So my conclusion is, if we're smart about it, we can get by actually quite comfortably on much, much less. And on that piece of good news, I will end. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience? Veronica?
Thank you very much for your talk. My question is more related to the way in which you do the research and the applications in your institution. For example, you mentioned that in the university you develop the algorithms to change the variations, but then you have this contact with the enterprises that tell you, well, we have this problem. For example, how many people is in the team and who is doing what for how much time?
So let's take the vessel scheduling for an example. The vessel scheduling started as an idea I came up with for a student project. You're always asked every year for ideas for student projects. I thought, what about vessel scheduling, North Sea supply vessels and that sort of thing? So we did a bit of research and we did a very simple, unrealistic algorithm for that. I do spend time talking to industry people. And some people got interested in this, so we then had a summer project for a very bright master's student, and she did her summer project working with Total, and we got some actual data, so we were able to start to build a model which was more realistic. By this process, just by student project, that sort of thing, it matured over a period of time. Then a company called Nexon, now CNUC, came to us and said, actually, we'd like to apply this to our real North Sea operations. Quite a small problem. They had 4 vessels and 4 platforms, 1 vessel per platform. And they gave us a lot of information, and that gave us a lot about timings and so on. And we'd been working with a truck company optimizing their software. So we were in a position to have a very good picture. And at that point, it became a bit more commercial. But we still did, from the research point of view, it was researchers. I had a research fellow, did a 6-month project with Nexon, and we were able to use our models to show them how they could reduce their fleet by 50%. And they did that, and they took out 2 vessels, saving themselves $6.5 million a year. So at that point, the concept moves from research into something that gets tested with more real data and a bit of concept, then something that a company might pay something for as a bit of consultancy. And then you think, maybe we could do something more. So we then got some funding from government. So I have a spin-out company set up, and it got some funding from government to lead a project with some oil and gas companies to do the Central North Sea study, which I was talking about there. And that led to essentially a cross-industry report that's been widely read. And that has now moved on to, we're just about to get some much larger funding for the company and the university research team, working with 3 operators to build software that they're going to be able to use routinely to do their scheduling. So these things tend to work along a chain which starts from a concept to a technology that you're applying in the real world, and different people will get involved at different times. The largest size the team has been up till now is 3. Myself and maybe a research fellow and a good quality student. But also we now have the spin-out companies involved, so there's a software engineer there who's very good at doing all the kind of doing things fast. So in the research group, we do things in Java because lots of our students do Java, so it's easy to do. In the implementation, it's in Go because it goes fast and has other useful properties. So it's a mix. It depends on where you are at the time, and some of these things go further than others. You do some things, you try a concept, it doesn't really work, or there's a better way to do it, or something. So, you've tried that, and that was just a piece of research.
you very much.
Yes, Victor.
Thank you, John. I have a question about how sustainable is to produce machine learning processing, because of course it's better to have these solutions since we have a better result if we try to optimize a lot of processing life. But I remember a statistic about for instance, the natural processing language, it's taking more power than the big industries. So if we have a lot of processing machines running all over the day, I think it's a real problem that researchers have to put attention of this. What do you think?
I think you raise a very good point, or series of points there, Victor. I've certainly, if you have a supercomputer, so one I visited in Stuttgart, thousands of Cray towers all connected together with fiber optics. It had its own power station and cooling plant. And a lot of what's done with Google and Amazon, cloud computing and that sort of thing, vast warehouses, huge electricity consumption. So these do not come for free. If the power can be generated through renewables, then it's less of a problem than if the power is generated through burning coal or some resource that isn't renewable. So there is actually a really complex question there that we all have to ask ourselves about the relative costs and benefits. And actually where then, so when I was talking about interconnected systems, I was partly referring to that is that, you have to solve problems holistically, and whacking down one problem and creating another problem doesn't necessarily get you somewhere. Well, it may postpone the pain. And in fact, neither you nor I, nor any individual can really conceive that or model that. It is so complex. Nobody has a model of that. In fact, we are now in the position of the termites. We can do our little bit. I can make a saving and an optimization here. I've chewed my piece of wood. I've stuck it on to the thing. Maybe occasionally I get a glimpse of the air tunnels and that sort of thing, but I don't really know what we're constructing. I don't know how it's all going to work out. I only do know that if we don't try and make efficiencies and savings in the systems that we've got, we're using something about 4 times the resource on the planet that's sustainable at the moment. So if we don't try and optimize, then we will definitely run out sooner rather than later. But that's not an unsophisticated, well, we've got no choice. Certainly we could do bad things, and we must always be looking to say, how can we do it more efficient? What are the knock-on effects? We need to be systemic in our thinking rather than isolated. So actually, we've just started a very humble research project on linked optimization problems at the moment, where you look along a supply chain and you look at different entities along that optimizing their individual thing, but then you might look at the holistic effects of that. So you might have, for example, the supply chain, the operators, the trucks, the vessels, but then there's holistic impacts in terms of environmental damage or whatever. So you can then think about what are the trade-off curves and try and understand those, and then sort of say, well, to maximize the holistic objectives, maybe we need to provide incentives so we can change the cost curves and the trade-off curves for the entities in the supply chain. And I think that's, the motivation of that is exactly the point that you made, that, there's a chain of effect here.
Hi, John. My question is about the difference between working with optimization problems in an academic setting versus working with this kind of problem in an industry, real-world problems. So, what's the difficulties you find commonly when you are trying to apply these kind of methods in an industry problem? Because I have some thoughts about the kinds of problems you encounter in academia papers benchmark. So what's the difference when you are trying to apply to a real world problem?
So the benchmarks issue is discussed in the community. We have these benchmark problems, and we do all these horse racing papers. And essentially what we're doing is developing algorithms that are really good at solving those problems. But then you have to ask yourself, are those problems really the right problems to solve? Are they interesting? Certainly they have some features that do occur in the real world, particularly those examples I mentioned. They are important problems, and they've been used in management science for a number of years. So I think that there is a basis there. But you don't have to step very far into the real world for those problems to change quite dramatically. So the real world can be very annoying if you are an academic researcher. It's not very clean. There are all sorts of messy wrinkles to the problem. And as I said, when you do the real problem, it's not really either a traveling salesman problem or a permutation flowchart problem. It's some kind of weird amalgam of them all, and then with its own little features. And some of those features are quite boring and mundane from an academic point of view, but absolutely crucial to solving the real world problem. And if you don't get that right, then you won't be able to solve the problem. The second problem that you incur is that you're talking about algorithms which, if they're properly applied, can be quite transformational to the operations of an organization. So 40% less boats in the North Sea is bad news for somebody, who makes their money on giving lots of boats. But also you come across resistance within an organization because people think that the AI is going to come along and take their job. It's going to make the decision for them. There'll be nothing for them to do. It'll do it faster and better. They'll be redundant. That is the fear, and you absolutely do come across that. And my experience actually has been that, in fact, what it does is it changes somebody's job rather than replace it, and they spend less of their time constructing a solution as actually being able to, it's cheap now to calculate a solution, so they can now think strategically, what if we did this, what if we did that, what if we postponed that, so you can actually, you raise the level of what they're doing. Although that might mean you need a different kind of person than the person you've currently got. So it's definitely an issue there. The third kind of thing you find when you're applying things is that you don't get the whole picture in one go. So you're trying to model the real world situation, but the people you're talking to, very few people in the world are sad enough to think of things in terms of mathematical formulations and optimizations. Most people think of the things in terms of the physical objects and circumstances they deal with, and that's how they see it. So there's a process where you have to get them to express the problem, and basically you need a very agile approach where you go back and say, does this work, does this work, does this work? And you need to be very, very open to accepting what they have. But even then there are things that you just can't build in. So when I was doing the truck scheduling example, we built in different sizes of truck. We built in uncertainty on what the load would be. We built in the different kinds of load that you would be carrying and the different training requirements that the drivers would need to be able to handle explosives or radioactive materials or whatever. We built all that in. We built in estimated routed times and everything. So we did a lot of work to model that. And then you would test it and somebody would say to you, oh, well, no, we would never send that driver to that warehouse. Oh, why not? He's got the right skills and that sort of thing. Well, the warehouse man had an affair with his wife, and so if we sent them there would be problems. You know, something that you're never going to be able to code in will come up because there's a whole world out there, and you know you just cannot codify everything. So you need to be very careful about the scope of the application. And you need to build in that, in fact, there are always going to be human overrides, human participation in the decision making, and that's a lot of the art of it. So I don't know if that answered your particular question. But
Thank you very much. Okay, Professor John McCall had a very busy week from Monday until today, and when we asked Professor McCall to lecture this talk, I'm sure he was not planning to lecture this, and although he knew he was going to have a lot of work, he agreed on lecturing this. So I want to thank you twice for lecturing this magnificent talk. I would say very inspiring, very enlightening talk. Thank you very much. And I want to present you with this testimony of your talk. Okay.
Thank you very much. Can I just say this has been my third time visiting UNAM, and it's always been a very inspiring experience. It's a fantastic university. Some of the research that's going on here is incredible, and it's been a great pleasure to meet with you all and work with you and exchange ideas. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you everyone. Gracias a todos por asistir. Thank you.
Thank you. I need to.